Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Laura Ciceri.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. My name is Laura Ciceri, and I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and this is part of an ongoing podcast series of What Would I Tell My 25-Year-Old Self? In this interview series, I ask senior supply chain leaders to think back to when they were 25 and ask themselves the question of what would they have told their 25-year-old self if they could go back. Today, I'm interviewing Philippe Lambotte, and I met Philippe about 25 years ago, and he's always been a great mentor and inspiration for me. So Philippe, tell the group a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Laura. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure and always good to see you here, despite all the change in those last years you talked about in the industry. Good, nice to see you. I'm Philippe Lambotte. I've worked in the industry for a few decades now. And so originally, I started my career as an electrical engineer. I worked in many blue chip companies. So I started my career in Procter & Gamble in Germany after doing my master in the US. So spent a few years in Procter & Gamble and then left for a very small family business in Belgium. And we can talk about what things are different, but I remember having a discussion with my father who thought I was crazy to leave P&G because I was going to be working there for the next 35 years of my life. So went back to a small company that ended up being bought by Jacob Suchard and being bought by Philip Morris. And I spent there my 22 years of career growing and basically following the time when the wall was coming down in the late 80s. Basically, the company in Philip Morris was buying one company a month. And I really participated to the team in operations supply chain that drove the integration process system from a multitude of very small local company to a regional in the West, expanded in the East, Latin America, Asia. And in 2004, I moved to Chicago, where I've been in the US since then. And in Chicago, I was global senior vice president of customer service, logistics, and planning, and ended up in sales too. And so I left Kraft when they split the business between Mondelez and Kraft, which, as you know, ended up being with Kraft Heinz and soon to be standalone again. So
That's a whole story, isn't it?
discussion, different podcast. And then I moved to different industries. So I worked for Merck as a senior vice president of supply chain globally for a few years, based in New Jersey from Chicago. I also had a stint with Mattel, totally different industry in Los Angeles, what I would call fashion, much more faster pace, change of SKU compared to the long lead time in pharmaceutical. Went back to pharmaceutical with Johnson & Johnson in orthopedics, again, global planning, great complexity, 125,000 SKU, one implant for every bone in your body. So direct to hospital, very, very exciting business and great to work for J&J. And then the last few years, I've been working for Tonal, which was a startup. So we ended up being a few $1 million recurring revenue to a couple of $100 million. And that was very different. That was a fitness machine driven by AI, where we had to install the machine on the wall of our consumer. So not only was it direct to consumer, but it was drilling holes in your wall and in a proper way because you're pulling 200 pounds on that machine. So it better stick there. And right now I'm doing consulting and board assignment and advisory here. So long and career here a few years, but I stopped telling my experience at 25 years because 25-year experience is a good number. So I have 25-year plus of experience if you want to use.
Yes, same here. So let's go back to 25-year-old Philippe. What were you doing at that time?
So at that time, I was actually I was in the US. I just got married. We moved with my wife in Los Angeles, and I was finishing my master. And there I really needed, a job because I had put a lot of money on paying for my master. And so I was just about to interview with Procter and Gamble in Cincinnati and move back to Germany. So I had already taken quite a lot of risk because, everybody was telling me I come from Belgium originally, safe country, everything is good, everybody loves you, why don't you stick around here? And I had taken risk, and so I had a lot of things ahead of me, but I wasn't exactly comfortable. And one of the things I wanted to mention from the get-go as I thought about this podcast here, Laura, is are things really different, from my 40 years, 40 years ago? I don't know, but I do believe that the new leaders today have to prepare themselves in slightly different career. I joked about Procter and Gamble, one career, one company. Then it was going to be one career, multiple company, kind of like the one I had. But I think for the people coming in the industry today, it's really multiple career with multiple company, including what I have right now, your own company. So people are going to be like you and I, stand alone. And I think they have to prepare themselves. So the degree of liberty and or agility are way higher than they used to be.
So, multiple careers. And when I was a chemical engineer and I also went to Procter and Gamble, I thought I would be lifelong Procter and Gamble. And I actually went through slight depression when I left Procter and Gamble because it's such a culture. And the choice for me to leave Procter and Gamble was really driven by my ex-husband, right? The operative word there is ex. And but in looking back, I think I got a lot of value out of being with different organizations and different challenges, and I'm really glad that I have diversity of experience. But I think you're right. I think the people that are listening to this podcast will have a different kind of career path. I think that you and I came from a time where people would go to a company and stay a long time. And it was during a growth phase when, the WTO with China was exploding. And, we were trying to build global supply chains, and global supply chains were built on the assumptions that governments would be rational and that, materials would always be available and that all we had to do was build it and they would come. But it's quite different now. And so I think people have to plan differently. But what would you tell that 25-year-old Philippe?
Exactly. And to that point, Laura, I would say that the number one is really about be agile and curious, right? That would be my overall. So I know some of the leader you've interviewed have mentioned the same thing, which is about take risk, right? Like be uncomfortable. And so don't go and find the easy way. Try to learn to the max. Look for special assignment in the company you learn. One of the things that really worked, I talked about it, is don't be afraid to move geographies. Geography could be East Coast versus West Coast, because, I think I've talked to many younger people that say, yeah, I love Connecticut. I feel comfortable. I'm going to stay in Connecticut, versus people that say, I want to travel the world. And I think the first mentality is going to box you in your future. So try to think about geographies within your country, because as a now an American citizen, so 20 plus years, but the US is so diverse that you cannot make an average what's an American, right? And so you'll learn in different area of the US. Changing countries is going to be the next step up, right? It's different languages can be frustrating if you go around in Europe, because we've had to deal with electrical plugs that have to change, and you think the Swiss have invented electrical plugs to annoy everybody. Uh, so it's a learning personally too, and region is obviously the next step, right? Because Asia versus Europe versus the US is different. One piece I would mention, and I've heard a lot of younger people and say, I'm gonna stabilize my career and wait a little bit. Don't, if you've got the opportunity to move around, do it early, because it ain't gonna be easier when you've got kids, when you've got family. You mentioned moving with your spouse. This is gonna be more anchor, and it's gonna be preventing you from having those experiences. And so my first advice: look for assignments, seek them, and don't focus on title, right? Way too much, including myself, people focus, oh, I'm going to be a manager, I'm going to be a director, I'm going to be a VP. And I remember one of the first school reunion I had, it was a couple of years after getting out from school, and I was a young project leader at P&G, right? And I met this old friend of mine, and I was asking, what do you do? And he said, I'm managing director. And so I came back home and I'm like, what have I done with my life? This guy is managing director, until I realized he was in a company of three people. So those titles, as you'll realize, they don't create value on their own. Roles do. Roles will be what you will learn. And so within this whirlwind of change, I would say change, don't be afraid to change industry. I changed industry way too late. I would say I stayed a long time with CPG, learned a ton in pharma. Don't be afraid to change function. And if you're in supply chain, function doesn't mean production planning or scheduling or long-term planning. It's all planning, right? So step up and think about planning, logistics, manufacturing, procurement. Take the big themes that will make you learn, and try to have, as I keep saying, a carry and tea, right? Be broad and have an area where you can be in depth. But the whole theme about agility is very important, and that's what's going to allow you to keep learning. And don't be afraid in your 25. Don't be afraid to learn, right? This your world and your oyster. So it doesn't matter what you're doing for the first 10 years, as long as you learn as much as you can. So that would be my, the agile and curious theme. The number two, which, I thought about, as I joked to you before this call, I would have a lot more to say to my 30-year-old or 40-year-old. But then you go back and say, what could I have done differently that planted the seed to have a different experience later on? And what I found, again, the learning teamwork early is very important, right? Working teamwork, when you try as a younger person, you're trying to prove yourself. And so that's all about you, and you want to show to your management who you are and what you can do well. That type of experience, though, is even better served if you're part of a team, because you're going to learn from mistakes. You're going to work with people that are at different places, different mindset, obviously different gender or nationalities, and that's going to teach you a lot. And I don't think I had that enough, or I seek that enough. And sometimes as an engineer, you're put in area where you're seeked for your expertise. And I think many of the jobs sometimes are way too, expert or standalone. Whereas I felt the team, and you'll see the value of the team in your later years. This is only it's going to be a gift that keeps on giving. And one of the things, while DEI is kind of a dirty word these days, right? It's been politicized. The I in DEI is all about inclusion. Again, I learned throughout the year that inclusion is also about viewing things from a different perspective. The story when there is an accident at a crossroads, and the person on the other side of the street will see things very differently than your side of the street. I've had many cases in my 30s, 40s, 50s where you're like, oh, I didn't think about it, or I didn't see things this way. And being part of a team will make you learn and early, and will give you habits that are going to be a gift for your future. So learn teamwork early and seek the teamwork, seek assignment with the team is something that I would advise for people to start at the beginning of their career. Go ahead.
I love it. So be agile, learn. But how would you describe the supply chain team? So when you think about teams, there's a very different team structure for swimming or cross country or basketball or soccer or football. And they have different rules and they have different behaviors. How would you describe what's needed to be a team player on a supply chain team?
I think you have to learn, again, to view each other's point, right? And to recognize that Somebody in procurement might have different incentive than in manufacturing, without going through the usual, make one SKU as long as you can. The guy in customer service is going to want to make his or her customer happy and will want change every day and will introduce, can you do that order like that was on plan for tomorrow? And so you have to recognize all those different players. And while I think people have sold supply chain as integrated and everybody thinks kumbaya way too much, because I think supply chain is about trade-off.
Right.
The old adage where if you want it fast or if you want it cheap or if you have to make choices. And what I learned is when you have a management, especially when you have sales and operation planning process, you have to put in front of management the choice to make. And here is the different scenario we can have. Here is the implication of each of those scenarios. So, if we choose scenario number one, the procurement leader is going to have his or her budget exploding, is going to be, annoying this type of supplier, and we're going to have to make trade-off and go to that supplier. That's not good, but that gives us, we think as a team, the best outcome for the company. And again, it's about learning what you're after, which is at the end, you want your company to be successful, not your function to be successful. And
Well, and
so,
I think your point around facilitating choice is really, really key because so many times I see folks that are new in the role as kind of order takers, tell me what to do. But people don't understand that, you can have it cheap, you can have it reliable, those trade-offs. And helping to visualize what those trade-offs are, I think, is a really key role. And then being able to communicate and influence others. So I think that's great wisdom. Anything else you would add?
my number three would be ask for feedback, which is all about, in a very static sense, can be about performance review, but it can be about how did I do, after a presentation, after a dialogue, after a sales and operation planning, seek feedback from multiple stakeholders because and seek negative feedback, right? Because at the beginning of your career, people will tell you what you do well. As you move toward a senior, people will tell you only what you do badly. And that's so your chance to learn is actually not reinforcing what you do well, is learning what you need to improve. And again, I think that will be that's a gift that is really useful. And part of that ask for feedback can be also think about having a mentor, right? It's not always easy, but a mentor is more than help me to be promoted. And a mentor is somebody that you could actually follow along your different company. I did the mistake where I had mentors, and then when you move company, you suddenly lose track and you don't keep connection. Don't do that. I think people don't think about their network as something that you need to nurture. This is not only something that you need to call on when you need a new job. And so the asking for feedback, I think, is something that I didn't learn enough, or I assume feedback was good when I didn't receive any, which is certainly not the case, right? And what you don't want to do is have a 360-degree performance when it's too late or when you need to improve something. So those were my number three here.
Yeah. Any time that you learned from failure or success, anything that you would say that was like a pivotal learning experience?
Yes, I think that the listening, doing a transformation in different industry can be different. So I think what I learned the most is when I moved from Kraft Foods, where your network, everything was implicit for me. I knew the performance indicator of the industry, and I moved to pharma with Merck, and you assume the what's important is similar. And I think I really did misunderstand the fact that, inventory has a very different role in pharmaceutical than it has in consumer goods, right? That the regulatory environment can be very different. So again, it's all about not assuming you know, which is why I advise at the very beginning, try to learn from different perspectives as much as you know. Having said that, it's all about not beating yourself, but recognizing what you learn and moving on with those new experiences. And I think that's, even to my children, right? I have two kids. This is the type of things where when things go bad, they don't want you to cry yourself in your bedroom. They want to see and they will observe how you react, right? And as the old adage says, not how you fall, is how you get up. So I think what you have to do is to take your feeling aside, step back and see what you've learned, and move on with the new toolkit that you've acquired. And that transition for me was a big deal. And I think I used it when I moved around in different company. And even when a startup, I didn't assume I knew everything, but I knew the tools that I had in my toolkits, and I tried to use them when appropriate. And I think it was very successful.
Well, I think that's a great saying. It's not how you fall, it's how you get up. I've certainly had to get up a lot.
We all do. And, I
Yeah.
people sometimes, when I coach people and you see all those restructuring, we all read about those news, is the negative motivation for younger people is be ready to be fired at least once in your life. And you will have to learn from that and you will have to move on. And I think it is about creating that resilience that everybody talks about, because you will need, as you build your multiple carriers, multiple company, I think you need to build that resilience. And you need all the tools you can have.
Well, and the process of being fired is humbling, right? I mean, it really gets at your core of, failure and personal failure, and getting up, when the core is hurting is hard. And, now, unfortunately, I think people are laid off much more frequently than when I saw in the 80s and 90s. And so your feedback, I think, is really right on. It's been great having you on the show today.
Michael,
Anything that you'd like to add to close? Anything I didn't ask you that you want to share?
I think, for the new leaders, the last thoughts I'll leave them with is know yourself, right? Get to know yourself, get to know what you're good at, what you're not good at, because your best bit will also be your overused strengths, and you need to watch out for that. So overall, know yourself is something that is really key, and be self-centered about what you want. We all know you've got a tough career. It's going to be a lot of moving pieces out of you in the next 20 years, next 30 years, but think about being resilient and creating that inner strength here.
Well, I think grounded in being clear on what you want is really important. And I think a lot of times people will call me when they're laid off and they're like, well, where do I go for a job? And what I tell them is take a blank notebook to a Starbucks or a favorite coffee shop and write down what are the characteristics of the career you want and what are the characteristics of the career you don't, and then try to be really clear on what works for you. I think so many people aren't clear, and because they're not clear, they can't really know themselves. And I think unveiling that is really important.
Well said.
Philippe, it's been great to have you on the show today. Thank you for being a great supply chain leader. You've given us some great advice. What I'm going to take away is it isn't how you fall, it's how you get up. And I hope everyone gets up with great success. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Laura. Take care.
Bye now.